Imagine living in a world where the planet is collapsing, electricity is rationed, food is scarce, and somewhere far away, a war over oil is unfolding. But instead of dramatic battle scenes, you hear about it only as a short news headline while eating breakfast. This is exactly how global politics appears in the Carbon Diaries 2015, a climate fiction novel by Saci Lloyd. In this near-future dystopian narrative, the mention of conflict involving Iran is brief, almost incidental. Yet these passing references reveal something profound about the geopolitics of climate change, fossil fuel dependency, and the fragile stability of the modern world. This video explores how Iran appears in the novel not as a central plotline, but as a crucial symbol of global oil politics and environmental crisis. The World of the Carbon Diaries 2015. Before examining the Iran reference, it is important to understand the novel's setting. The story is structured as a diary of a 16-year-old Laura Brown who records the events of 2015 after Britain introduces a radical policy, carbon rationing. Every citizen receives a limited number of carbon credits, controlling their use of electricity, heating, transport, and other energy-consuming activities. The government introduces this system because climate change has intensified dramatically. Floods, storms, and resource shortages are destabilizing the world economy. The United Kingdom becomes the first country to impose carbon quotas in an attempt to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and prevent further environmental collapse. However, while Laura's diary focuses on her personal life, family conflicts, teenage relationships, and her punk band, the wider world is unraveling. Global politics, wars, and environmental disasters appear as short news snippets, creating the sense that Laura is living through the early stages of planetary crisis. Climate fiction and the rise of Eco-Dystopia. The Carbon Diaries 2015 belongs to the genre often called climate fiction or cli-fi. These narratives imagine future societies transformed by climate change and environmental instability. In eco-dystopian literature, the disaster is not a sudden apocalypse, but a slow collapse of ecological systems and political stability. Scholars of dystopian fiction note that modern environmental narratives frequently portray humanity confronting the consequences of ecological exploitation and fossil fuel dependence. Saci Lloyd's novel exemplifies this approach. Instead of depicting a distant future, it imagines a near future that looks almost identical to our world, except that climate change has become impossible to ignore. Governments impose strict environmental policies, economies destabilize, and everyday life becomes shaped by resource scarcity. The function of global news in the novel. A distinctive feature of the novel is its episodic diary format. Because Laura writes daily entries, global events appear not as elaborative narrative scenes but as fragments of news reports, overheard conversations, and brief reflections. This structure allows Lloyd to weave together two levels of storytelling. One, the personal narrative of a teenager navigating adolescence. Two, the global narrative of climate change, economic collapse, and geopolitical tension. The news references serve as a form of world building. Through them, readers learn that the environmental crisis is not confined to Britain but affects the entire planet. Countries struggle with extreme weather, failing economies, and conflicts over resources. Iran and the politics of oil. Within these news snippets appears a reference to conflict involving Iran. The mention is brief, but its significance is immense. Iran is one of the world's most strategically important regions for fossil fuel resources, possessing vast reserves of oil and natural gas. In the context of the novel, the war connected with Iran represents a struggle for control over diminishing energy resources. As climate change intensifies, and oil supplies become unstable, geopolitical tensions increase. Nations compete for access to fuel, and conflicts erupt in regions where these resources are concentrated. By inserting this reference into Laura's diary, Lloyd suggests that the climate crisis is not only environmental but also deeply political and economic. The same fossil fuels that drive modern civilization also generate international conflict, energy scarcity, and global instability. The Iran reference gains deeper meaning when viewed alongside other global events mentioned in the novel. News reports describe fuel shortages, rising energy prices, and disruptions to transportation systems. These developments illustrate a world facing energy scarcity. Modern societies rely heavily on fossil fuels for electricity, transportation, agriculture, and industry. When access to these resources becomes uncertain, entire economic systems begins to falter. In the novel, carbon rationing is Britain's attempt to manage this crisis. By limiting carbon consumption, the government hopes to stabilize energy use and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Yet, the policy also reveals how dependent everyday life has become on fossil fuels. Iran as a symbol of fossil fuel dependency. The brief mention of Iran in the novel functions symbolically. It represents the global system of petropolitics, in which oil production shapes international relations and power structures. For more than a century, access to oil has influenced wars, alliances, and economic policies. Regions rich in fossil fuels often become centers of geopolitical competition. In the Carbon Diaries 2015, the conflict involving Iran reminds readers that climate change and energy politics are inseparable. In other words, the environmental crisis cannot be understood purely as an ecological issue. It is also a consequence of the economic and political structures built around fossil fuel consumption. Iran in the novel: Oil, Conflict, and Climate Politics. In the Carbon Diaries 2015, references to Iran appear only briefly through news reports that Laura Brown records in her diary. These mentions are easy to overlook, yet they carry significant geopolitical meaning. The novel depicts a near-future world where climate change has intensified and governments have introduced strict environmental policies such as carbon rationing. Amid these developments, Laura occasionally hears news about conflicts involving Iran. These references point toward the global struggle over oil resources and energy security. Iran is historically one of the most important regions in the world for fossil fuel reserves, and conflicts in the region often revolve around control of energy supplies. By including this brief reference, Lloyd subtly reminds readers that the climate crisis is not only environmental but also political and economic. Nations compete for energy resources while attempting to manage the consequences of environmental degradation. Thus, the mention of Iran functions as a symbol of the world's dependence on fossil fuels and the geopolitical tensions that arise from it. War Today, Real-World Geopolitics. The fictional conflict mentioned in the novel also resonates with the geopolitical realities of today. In recent years, tensions involving Iran have escalated due to disputes over regional power, military activities, and strategic waterways. These tensions often involve major global actors such as the United States and the State of Israel, reflecting the complex political dynamics of the Middle East. One of the most critical elements in these conflicts is the Strait of Hormuz, a narrow passage through which a large portion of the world's oil supply travels. Any instability in this region can disrupt global energy markets and affect economies across the world. This demonstrates how energy resources remain deeply intertwined with international politics. Literature and reality, a striking parallel. What makes Lloyd's novel particularly interesting is how closely its fictional background resembles real-world concerns. The passing reference to conflict involving Iran reflects the persistent reality that fossil fuel dependency shapes global power structures. Environmental crisis, energy scarcity, and geopolitical rivalries are interconnected forces that influence the stability of modern societies. Through these brief news snippets, the Carbon Diaries 2015 reminds readers that global events, even wars taking place thousands of miles away, can shape everyday life. In Laura's world, those events help justify policies such as carbon rationing. In our world, they remind us how fragile the global energy system truly is. The distance between global war and everyday life. One of the most striking aspects of the novel is the emotional distance between Laura's everyday life and the global events she hears about. While news reports mention war, floods, and economic turmoil, Laura continues to worry about school exams, friendships, and band rehearsals. This contrast reflects a key theme of climate fiction, the difficulty individuals face when trying to comprehend global environmental change. The crisis unfolds on a planetary scale, yet people experience it through fragmented media reports and personal inconveniences. By presenting the Iran conflict as a brief news item, Lloyd captures this sense of detached awareness. The war exists in the background of Laura's life, shaping the global situation without directly entering her personal narrative. The interconnection of climate and geopolitics. Ultimately, the Iran reference illustrates the interconnected nature of modern crises. Environmental degradation, fossil fuel dependence, and international politics form a complex network of causes and consequences. Climate change intensifies resource scarcity. Resource scarcity fuels geopolitical competition. Geopolitical conflicts disrupt global economies. These disruptions, in turn, affect ordinary citizens who must adapt to policies such as carbon rationing. Although the war involving Iran appears only briefly in the Carbon Diaries 2015, it plays a crucial role in the novel's political imagination. The reference reminds readers that climate change is not simply an environmental problem, but a global crisis involving economics, energy systems, and international power struggles. By embedding geopolitical news within the everyday diary of a teenager, Saci Lloyd demonstrates how vast global forces quietly shape ordinary life. The conflict over oil, symbolized by the mention of Iran, reveals the underlying tensions of a world struggling to transition away from fossil fuel dependency. In this way, the Carbon Diaries 2015 becomes more than a story about carbon rationing. It becomes a powerful reflection on the fragile relationship between human civilization, energy resources, and the planet itself.